back to Abuja. The Economic Community of West African States, they're giving a press briefing. Let's take a listen.
Of election-related violence and insecurity, some of which regrettably resulted in the loss of life and the postponement of elections in some polling units. We also observed that these elections took place amidst a naira, a demonetization policy, and fuel scarcity. This notwithstanding, we observed that election day proceeded largely peacefully. The determination, patience, and resilience of all of those Nigerians who turned out to vote in these elections are to be highly commended. We note that there was only one woman presidential candidate out of a total of 18. While there has been concerted efforts to advance progress in increasing women's political participation as candidates since the 2019 elections, including the tabling of a private members' bill in Parliament to promote gender equality, we note that this bill was not passed. The vibrant participation by the youth in these elections was evident, especially in campaigns and on social media. We observed the significant role of the youth as INEC officials. We note that the campaign was vibrant and colorful, with the adoption of robust campaign methods, including numerous billboards, posters, and large, very well-attended rallies, as well as active social media campaigns. We welcome the role played by the media in covering the elections, but also note several challenges which were reported to the observers, including concerns about the safety of the journalists, disinformation, and incidents of hate speech on social media. On election day observations, our observers noted significant delays in the opening of polls in most of the polling units observed, which impacted on pre-poll procedures. In some instances, polling officials arrived late at their designated polling units, while in others, there were gaps observed in the timely supply and delivery of essential materials. We also noted that polling staff, security personnel, and other essential workers deployed on election day were unable to vote and were therefore disenfranchised from the process. And on the role of polling staff and the polling procedures, polling staff conducted their duties transparently, although in some cases there were inconsistencies in applied procedures. At some polling units, voters were encouraged to check their names on the voters register before they could join the queue to avoid being turned away from being at the wrong polling unit. And this was commendable. On the matter of the use of technology, while the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, functioned satisfactorily in most polling units, our observers reported that the BVAS was faster on facial recognition than on detecting fingerprints of the voters during the accreditation process. The requirement first to try fingerprint recognition slowed down the process, as did issues of connectivity and training. There was general trust by officials, agents, and voters in the integrity of the BVAS. On the matter of ballot papers, several challenges were encountered with ballot papers. The group has not been able to establish full details regarding these issues, but will make more substantive comments in the final report where necessary. On the communication strategy of INEC, the INEC provided public assurances of its preparedness and readiness to conduct the elections as scheduled, including the recruitment and training of polling staff, distribution of materials and other logistics in advance of election day. While we commend the fact that INEC conducted press conferences at various intervals, we noted that INEC's identification and measures to address various logistical challenges which were experienced on election day were not always communicated in real time. On voter turnout, we observed that there was variation in voter turnout. We'll explore this aspect further and provide an assessment in our final report. On participation and inclusion, it was encouraging to note that priority was accorded to pregnant and nursing mothers, persons with disabilities, and elderly people. INEC is also to be commended for its efforts at fostering greater inclusion especially for persons with disabilities, by providing assistive devices at polling units, including braille, ballot guides, and magnifying glasses. On the role of party agents of political parties were present in many of the polling units. And party agents are an important element of the electoral process, but their behavior, as observed, was not always positive. We witnessed a number of polling units with significant numbers of party agents, many of whom were not wearing INEC accreditation badges. On security, the group observed the presence of security officials at most polling stations. They were professional, unobtrusive, they carried out their duties diligently, and respected the rights of voters to cast their ballots. On the secrecy of the ballot, and some polling units observed were in open spaces, while others were in tents and indoors in public buildings. Therefore, the layout varied from polling unit to polling unit, and for the most part, the secrecy of the ballot was assured, though we noted in some cases that the positioning of polling booths potentially compromised a secrecy. And in a number of polling stations, voters could have benefited from more voter education on the folding of the ballot papers, as some voters were unintentionally exposing their vote on their ballot papers. As chairperson, I had the opportunity to visit several situation rooms on election day, including the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, the Gender and Election Watch Situation Room, and the Inclusive Friends Data Center. And some of our observers also managed to visit other situation rooms, including IAGA, Africa, and the Clean Foundation situation rooms. These initiatives should be encouraged as they enhance transparency, and provide a national perspective on key data emerging from the electoral process, especially on election day. And this instills a degree of confidence in the electoral process. On closing the ballot units, the polling stations, and counting. And due to the late start, there were still long queues at some of the polling stations or polling units at the time of the closing of the polls. However, it was observed that those who were in the queues at 2:30 p.m. when the polls closed were allowed to vote. The close and count followed the due process for the most part with a high degree of transparency. And though various polling units experienced significant delays in closing due to their late openings, we found that the management of closing and count procedures varied in consistency. And one of the marked challenges we noted was the fact that as voting hours were extended, the close and count had to take place in the dark in many cases. It was noted that at some polling units, there was no proper lighting to facilitate counting at night. We know that lamps were not provided to polling staff to assist them in carrying out their crucial duties at this phase of the process. And on results management, we observed that the results were not uploaded on the INEC results viewing portal in real time as expected in many of these cases. We acknowledge the statement released by INEC in this regard. And to conclude, as the results process continues, let me end by reiterating the desire that all Nigerians, especially the candidates who contested elections, continue to uphold their pre-election commitment to peace. The group strongly encourages all Nigerians to exercise patience to allow INEC and its staff across the country to conclude the results process effectively and peacefully. And we wish to reiterate the assessment of the previous Commonwealth Observer Group in 2019 that electoral reform remains a continuous process, building on what has worked successfully, addressing shortcomings in an inclusive and transparent manner that is welcomed by all relevant interest parties to various aspects of the electoral process. We encourage INEC to conduct a thoroughgoing post-election review of the electoral process to draw constructive lessons from previous elections, and would also encourage the consideration for the establishment of appropriate domestic mechanisms to take forward recommendations proposed by all citizen and international observer missions. The Commonwealth Observer Group will make relevant recommendations in its final report. Notwithstanding the shortcomings identified in these elections, Nigerians were largely accorded the right to vote. And we trust that the final stages of collation and announcement of results will continue to be handled in a transparent, a peaceful, and credible manner. We congratulate all Nigerians for their determination, their patience and resilience displayed throughout the electoral process. And we call on all of them, all Nigerians, to maintain the same commitment in the post-election period, especially as Nigeria prepares to return to the polls on the 11th of March for the gubernatorial and other elections. And we call on all those with grievances to address disputes through the prescribed legal challenges. The time now is for restraint and continued patience as we await the final results. And indeed, as President Koroma said earlier this morning, that we will continue to be in Nigeria to help facilitate a peaceful resolution of any matters that may arise in the post-election period. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We'll now take some questions from the floor. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a mic will be given to you. I don't see any hands.
All right, we are live in Abuja. Mr. Thabo Mbeki, former president of South Africa, they're part of the ECOWAS team that has been observing the elections in Nigeria, just finished his report there, verbal report, and now they're about to take questions from the media. The report pretty much mixed, where they praised INEC for attending to women with infants and people with disabilities, allowing them access to voting. But they also faulted the lack of equipment, like lack of lighting at different polling units. Also, INEC arriving late and a number of the other technical issues, and as well as going back to our conversation with the Public Relations Officer of the Lagos Command of Police, they also, ECOWAS, Mr. Mbeki, His Excellency, highlighting insecurity and safety for voters in Nigeria.
One thing that he also mentioned, when it came to the ballot box secrecy, I like the fact that he mentioned that the position of polling booths compromised secrecy to a large extent. And he also made it mention of the fact that some members of the electorate unintentionally exposed, their ballot paper or their votes or who they voted for at the polling units, besides, the popular ones that we're already aware of.
Right.
In
voter education.
Yeah.
It's a good point. He mentioned the need for more voter education because he said, people, like you said, inadvertently exposing, who they voted for. So that's also a very comprehensive report there from
Absolutely.
ECOWAS.
And we don't expect anything less. I mean, Thabo Mbeki has become a veteran with regards to election observations across Africa. And one of the places, of course, where a very hot spot that he was able to resolve with the several disputes that have happened in elections in Kenya. Now, he was one of the main mediators who was able to bring Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga to the table for a handshake. And the reason I bring this up is because he did emphasize at the end that he's available for any peaceful resolution of conflict that may arise. And, with diplomats, they don't just throw things out there. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to note that and to continue to hope and encourage our leaders that let's accept the results when they are declared by INEC. And if we don't agree with them, let's take the necessary, the petitions, the steps that the law affords you to dispute.
Excellent point, because if we tie this back to Dino Melaye's rant, he did threaten there would be legal action if things don't go their way, which is right.
So I don't expect less.
Yeah, so Mr. Mbeki and so on would be expected to try to maybe mediate these issues if that is to unfold. But I think the talking points from the coverage we've been doing now since the election and it was very, very good that we're now getting the observers to comment on this. INEC has some work to do.
Some?
A lot.
Okay.
quite a bit. I mean, the point has been made several times that this election has been about logistics, arriving on time, making sure that materials are there. We saw a report. I mean, we've had so many reports: lack of ink, lack of writing material, people having to go and provide tables. I'm sure if it was Bielsa or if it was Delta State.
Someone brought a generator to power the PVAS.
Right. So the main thing here is INEC going to be able, when you take our 24/7 coverage from us and other media outlets, the feedback from the observers, international observers with bodies like ECOWAS, security, with our discussion with Mr. Hunde, are things going to be... The next test is March 11th, right? The next test is the gubernatorial election, and that's what everyone is going to be hoping for. That things there turn around.
Honestly, I've forgotten who we had here talking
We've
about.
We've had lots of guests.
The accreditation, the mock accreditation. One of the questions I recall asking was, how seriously did INEC take that mock accreditation? Because the records in terms of a late arrival and whatnot, we still saw a repeat of history. Yeah. When it came to people finding their polling units, it was one of the concerns that was expressed by the analysts that would also be an issue on election day. Yeah. I'm sure INEC did their best.
Right.
The best was definitely not good enough. And one thing that I found a bit, this is really, it has nothing to do with this broadcast that we just saw, but earlier on during the collation meeting, I found it a bit uncomfortable, unsettling when the INEC chairman said collation is not done based on the basis of transmission, but based on the availability at the collation center. Then I went on my phone to check IREF. I see that they have just about 50-something thousand
votes,
uploaded out of the
yeah.
polling units, and we're expecting 170-something thousand.
Yeah.
So it just felt like a case of what you ordered and what you got, because it's not living up to the expectation.
On a positive note, Thabo Mbeki did say electoral reform, to quote him, electoral reform remains a continuous process.
So,
just to lighten things up, we do hope that the notes can be taken in future at some point. We have to remain optimistic, right?
We should.